Hello, and welcome to Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast where anything goes. I'm your host, Cody Schultz. Joining me is the one and only Ben Horn. In this episode, we are discussing what it means to take on the title of landscape photographer, and how our proximity to the road may lead to false perceptions of wilderness. Let's dive right into it, shall we? Well, Ben, it looks like I am all set for June, where I will be going down to the Smoky Mountains. So that's officially happening.
Well, that's cool. That'll be an interesting experience for you. And actually, I was thinking about that, and I was wondering, and this may very well answer the question: how far ahead of your trips do you really start, thinking about, getting prepared for everything and kind of going through that mental process of
I've
getting ready
been
for it?
very anxious towards it in the best of ways. I've been thinking about like the trip in general a lot, but I haven't been doing anything in terms of preparation. Like, especially when it comes to the photography side, I haven't looked up any trails, or all I know is the campground is set.
That's definitely the important part, having the reservations. Well, do you ever avoid the really popular areas on purpose?
I try to. Like, I don't think so. In Acadia, I got a guidebook. Like the second or third day, we went to a store and we picked up one of the guidebooks that they had, and I flipped through it just because at that point I was looking for easier trails. But I don't think I'm going to try doing anything like that. I just kind of want to get a map, pick trails at random, and just go for it. So I won't say that I will specifically avoid anything.
Yeah, because I suppose I like to do a bit of a mixture of both, checking out some of the popular areas, but it seems like right away, my mind just goes right to those lesser visited areas. I imagine it'll probably be fairly busy that time of year when you visit.
Probably, yeah. So, I mean, whenever I go out, I want to be away from people anyway, so
yeah,
I definitely won't be going anywhere popular.
Yeah, I can very much relate to that. Sometimes it's nice to play tourist a little bit, just to get a feeling for the lay of the land.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's definitely nice to do a little exploring in some of those further away parts, if there is such parts.
I'm going to Nashville then for 2 days, I think, to end the trip anyway, just because it's an area that I've wanted to check out. So that'll be my touristy playing part.
Do you enjoy visiting urban areas at all? I mean, is that something that you're drawn to, as opposed to more wilderness type of locations?
The wilderness is definitely more so than anything else. I mean, I went up to New York City for 2 or 3 back-to-back trips after a couple months separating them, but then yeah, I'm good with that now.
Yeah, for whatever reason, like the urban areas for me, incredibly intimidating to visit. Like if I had to go to like New York City or even San Francisco or something like that. I mean, I don't know. I think I'd feel rather claustrophobic with just everything going on, and I don't know, something about one-way streets in like a very tightly packed area. I don't even go to downtown San Diego very much, and it's a beautiful area. But I very, very seldom go down there. But for me, going to a wilderness area, just something about that breath of fresh air that I enjoy. Oh yeah,
so much more enjoyable because you can just go there and truly relax. I mean, you go into a city, and especially talking about like New York, you go there and everything is hectic.
Oh yeah,
and it's perfect for introverts.
Interesting.
In the weirdest sense, because like nobody. I've always heard that about with New York. It's the perfect city if you're an introvert, because nobody cares about anybody else. It's one of those cities where you're constantly surrounded by people, but nobody
So I guess
wants
you kind of
anything
get
to do
that,
with
that
you.
surface level socialization in terms of like, riding on the subway or walking down the street or whatever. But at the same time, you're kind of feel like you're off on your own in some way. So I can definitely see how that would be the case. Interesting.
But yeah, I mean, even recently, especially, like Quakertown's the closest bigger town that I could actually walk around in, and they have farmers market or whatever they want to call it. And here and there, I'll go there and walk around. But for the most part, I'm like, no, I don't want to be around people. I'd rather be around trees.
Yeah. I have kind of a simple question for you here. And maybe it's not that simple when it comes down to it. But do you consider yourself to be a landscape photographer?
Yeah, not so simple there, Ben.
Yeah. The simplest questions are the most difficult sometimes.
Yeah, really. I don't know. I mean, because when you think about a landscape, at least for me, and I think this goes for the majority of people, you think of like Ansel Adams kind of landscape, where it's like this grand vista. Not so much like the more intimate stuff that I'm drawn to and that I do, or that like Elliot Porter does. So to qualify as a landscape photographer, I wonder, I think it's different for everyone.
Yeah. So
I'm not quite sure how to. Yeah, I don't know.
It's a tough question. I think I would classify as a landscape photographer, though certainly specializing in the smaller scenes. But there was something that there's a quote I had posted on Twitter a long time ago, and it kind of deals with that. And so I'll read it here. It says, "It's more difficult to photograph a subject for what it truly is than what it is not." And because I was thinking about with my own photography and how my goal is usually to try and depict a subject for what it is. I'll see a subject that has natural beauty, and I simply want to showcase that in the photo, just pretty much as it is, without embellishing things too dramatically. But I find that it's easier to photograph something for what it isn't, and to make it into something, which, it's all art. It's, a black and white photo that has heavy dodging and burning. You're making it into something that it isn't from an artistic standpoint. But I find it's difficult to photograph a subject for what it is, which is one of my goals. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on whether you try to photograph something for what it is, or try to photograph something for what it's not, or even if that makes any sort of sense with your work.
No, it does. For me, it's more so about photographing a feeling or an emotion, more so than what something actually is. It's capturing how I feel in that moment as a form of self-expression, I think. And I think Guy Tall put it pretty beautifully in his artist statement. He says, "I do not consider myself a photographer who creates art, but a self-expressive artist working in the medium of photography." And so I think that really describes my approach really well too. Whereas I'm not necessarily a landscape photographer because I'm not photographing just the landscape.
So if you were
I'm photographing something more.
Yeah. If you were to photograph a subject and it turned out in a way that doesn't depict the feeling you had when you're photographing it, but it was technically a very solid photo and perhaps even gives a much different feeling when you see that final photo, do you think you would find that to be a failure because it doesn't necessarily reflect what you're feeling in the moment, or does that even matter? Is it part of just a whole process, like an evolving process that constantly changes?
It's an evolving process. I mean, if I get a photograph, so for instance, I have a piece called detritus, and it's this this, not a leaf, but it's like a pine needle or small pine branch on the ground. And when I photograph that, it's on top of snow. And I think this goes a little bit into the whole ideology of post-processing and what is too much post-processing. But I spent about an hour just cleaning up all the little debris around that main subject to create it into what I wanted. So it's an evolving process, but I think it's also one of those deals of when you're creating art for the means of self-expression, you can't be afraid of going into Photoshop or even in the darkroom working with film and really working that photograph until it is exactly what you want it to be.
That's definitely a very good way of thinking about it. I think that it also mirrors a fair amount of what my experience is for that. And there'll be times when there's perhaps a subject that I come across that I really do enjoy, and I shoot it in the best light. But when I see that final result, it doesn't speak to me in the way that I thought it would. And oftentimes I dismiss that image because it seems like it just falls short for one reason or another. But it is interesting to think about it as just a constantly evolving process, especially since our perception changes with time and the way that we view our work initially versus later on. Has there ever been any photos that you just completely dismissed for one reason or another, then circled back to and has become one of your favorite images?
Not really, no. I also don't go back through my portfolio as much as I probably should. And when I say portfolio, I mean like all the photographs that I've taken, like my hard drive, Lightroom catalog, whatever. And I'm actually meaning to do that coming up pretty soon because I want to redo my portfolio and really dive deep into what I want to show. But no, there haven't been many times. If typically I know, or at least I feel I know when a photograph is right, and that feeling doesn't really change. And I think that goes along though with my approach because of it being more emotional, whereas I'm not trying to depict anything per se like how you are.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas instead I'm just depicting an emotion that I felt at that time.
And it definitely seems that in that sense, the images that you photograph, I can see how they would be perhaps more constant, because you're going to remember that feeling you had when you shot that photo. In my sense, when I'm shooting a photo, some of it has to do with the feeling, but it more so has to do with capturing the subject itself. And in time, my perception and my memory of what that subject was fades. And as a result, my perception of the final photo changes because perhaps I wasn't as satisfied with the image in the moment because it didn't give me that same feeling I had when I saw the subject. But when my perception of that scene fades, or I should say as my memory of the original scene fades, and I become more satisfied with the work. But perhaps that also has something to do with shooting color, because there is that other aspect of realism that you don't have with black and white, where you automatically have an abstracted, variation of reality. It's just that feeling that you had when you shot the photo that you're trying to capture and to convey.
Yeah, I wonder how that goes with the realism aspect, because your memory's fading of that time and place. The photograph obviously isn't going to change. But if you don't like a photograph because it doesn't match the reality of that time and place, and then as you forget it, then you like it again because it has that disconnect, if that makes sense.
Exactly. That's the exact experience, which is perhaps an interesting thing about photographing with color and going back and revisiting one's work, because the perception does change. And I can see how that could be perhaps different with black and white, which is a really fascinating concept when it comes down to it. Since you already have a very highly, abstract version of reality that you're starting with. So you're not really comparing it to that. So that actually is quite interesting. I hadn't really thought about that aspect of color versus black and white.
I know you talked about it before and how you hadn't been able to, I guess you said before about developing it properly, but have you ever thought of giving black and white a shot again?
I really should. I find that a lot of subjects I've been drawn to lately are probably better suited for black and white anyways. Some of the textures and some of the forms. So I think that's something I should do. Though I have a feeling that with black and white, I really should be developing my own film, which is something I'm not set up to do at the moment. And in the past experiences I've done with that, I failed pretty bad with it. I tried. Do you develop your own film?
Yeah, I do.
How do you develop it? What method do you use?
So with me, it's going to be a little bit different because of being 4x5.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm using a Mod 54 apparatus, whatever you want to call it, that holds the actual film, and that goes into a Patterson tank.
Okay. That's pretty convenient.
Yeah, I can just do all of my development in daylight, obviously, except for loading the film into the tank, but it makes it, I think I do like 6 sheets at a time, 4 to 6 sheets at a time, and it makes it pretty quick and easy. I'm going to be experimenting with tray developing as well, and I want to try, they have another daylight processing tank called a steer-in press, which is one that for 8x10 you would have to look into more so. They just released an 8x10 version of theirs if you wouldn't want to do tray processing.
And that's actually the method I tried. I tried tray developing, and I tried to follow the technique as good as possible. I watched the YouTube videos, but I was constantly getting uneven development along the edges of the film.
Okay.
And it wasn't anything that I could take seriously, because I knew that if I were to shoot a photo that I really liked, chances are I'd mess it up in the development.
Right.
Do you ever get any, with the system that you have, do you ever get any irregularities in the development? Perhaps that system doesn't really have issues as much like that.
Yeah, luckily not. What I have been finding, and why I want to try and find an alternative to the Mod 54, is because of how it holds the film on the off to the sides. It almost looks like light leaks, but I know they're not light leaks. Instead, it's just because of how it holds the film. It creates some kind of weird development just in little sections. That's kind of what I was thinking might happen with that. Yeah, it's not too bad because you can quickly take them off in Photoshop, just clone them out. But especially more recently, I've been thinking about starting doing contact prints, and that's where I'll start having issues.
Do you have any photos that have any sort of sky in them where you can see those irregularities even stronger? Or is it just you see it even in like a area that has plenty of detail where that, subtle effects would be hidden, but it still shows through?
It still shows through because what's happening, at least what I think is happening, is that it's rubbing off the emulsion as well while it's developing. So now you have essentially bare film or very uneven developed film. Yeah, I guess I'd call it.
Yeah, I think that's similar to, kind of like what I was having happen with the tray developing, where my technique was not great, and I was getting the uneven development just because like little, eddies of the developer around the edges, and it not quite hitting things properly. And that's something I've heard can happen with certain tanks and certain systems for developing. And I do know that some of the like the rotary process tanks typically avoid that, like the Jobo systems and such. But man, that would be a pretty healthy investment. But that's been the one thing that I've been like holding off on in terms of why I haven't done the black and white, because I just don't have trust in my own processing of the film. But I do think I would probably enjoy it, especially as color film gets more and more expensive.
Yeah, I'm surprised you don't develop your own film. Like, even with color. Like, E6 I get, because E6 is a pain.
Yeah.
I haven't even, like, I've done C41 for color negatives, and that's a breeze. That's really no big deal. The temperature thing is really the only thing that you have to keep an eye on. But especially, like, you get a Jobo, and then does the work for you for the most part, at least.
Yeah.
But then that's a massive investment.
Yeah. And that's probably what I have to do if I were to go black and white. And also, I don't know if I would feel guilty shooting black and white film, but then using the hybrid digital film workflow and scanning and doing the editing on the computer. I mean, I know I can get excellent output that way, but I feel like something might be missing with the hybrid workflow as opposed to, complete darkroom setup, which I don't have the space for. I don't have the, I've got a pretty small house. I don't have space for a darkroom and all the necessary equipment. And I don't know if contact printing, if that's the sort of thing I would be satisfied with. So what are your thoughts on the scanning sort of workflow versus keeping it all analog for black and white work?
Before touching on that, why don't you feel that way about color?
I think it's because with color, we don't really have the same sort of options that used to exist for darkroom work.
Okay.
In the era of the Cibachromes printing from transparencies optically in a darkroom, that sort of system, it really yielded these absolutely beautiful prints. It was before my time. I never had an opportunity to work with that style of darkroom printing, though I've seen some of the prints and they're absolutely gorgeous. But with color, it seems that the hybrid workflow has really just become the way of shooting color film these days. I know that you can shoot color negative film and then you can still print that way. But there's something about shooting transparencies that I love. I love that process. And since those same tools aren't available anymore, that's why I think I'm okay with the digital workflow, the digital film hybrid workflow.
Gotcha. So going back to your question then, with my feelings towards the hybrid versus traditional workflow, I go back and forth with it a lot. And I think it has more to do with my yearning for a hands-on approach for photography or for art in general than it does necessarily for the fact that it's black and white film that could be processed traditionally still.
I see that. I definitely see how that's the case. I do love that hands-on process.
I mean, that's why I develop my own film too, because I like and that's why I keep going back to film just in general, because I just like the hands-on, as much control as possible kind of approach to it.
Yeah, that's also one of the reasons why I'm drawn to it. There's just that tangible aspect of it, and also just the story behind it. The fact that you loaded that sheet of film, you carried it with you wherever you went, and it saw the light for a little bit, and there's just that physical reminder of being there, which is something that's fun to look back at. And on a little bit of a different topic, there was something else that I had posted on Twitter a little while back, and it actually got a fairly interesting response, which could lead to some interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to hearing your take on this. But I posted the following on Twitter, and this is also why I asked, if you consider yourself a landscape photographer a little bit earlier. And it doesn't have to be landscape photography, but so the tweet says, landscape photographers, think of your all-time favorite photograph, a photo you're extremely proud of. With that photo in mind, answer the following question. How far away was the nearest road? So I'd be curious to hear from your perspective, your favorite photo and just how far away was the nearest road?
Favorite photograph. All right, let's see.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, we're gonna have to split this into two here, Ben. So we're going to go with a favorite photograph from Pennsylvania and then a favorite photograph from my travels because I can't decide between the two.
Yeah.
Favorite photograph from Pennsylvania was taken up at my family's cabin, and it's entitled Forbidden. It was taken right on the porch of the cabin, and the road is probably about a couple hundred yards away. I don't know exactly how long, but we're got quite a long driveway to the cabin. So it's not near the road, but it's closer than you would typically like it to be with like a landscape photography or landscape photograph.
Yeah.
The other photograph is the lady's slippers taken in Acadia. That's a totally different story because that one was on top of a mountain, thousands of feet from a couple good miles probably from a road. So, yeah.
And it was interesting, and your answers actually very much sum up a lot of what photographers said. Where there'll certainly be those photos that are, further from the road, the ones that you traveled further to reach and worked harder for. But there's also those photos that are extremely close to the road. Now, I'm curious, the photo you had mentioned, and you said it was taken from the porch of the cabin. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, Forbidden.
Now, for that particular photo, is there any sort of context in that image that would give you any sort of sense of where you were, what was, anything nearby?
No.
Interesting.
Nope. It's one of those images that it looks as though you are right in the breadth of the woods. You are just entangled in it. And
it was interesting because one of the reasons why I asked that question, and also I think it made people think a little bit, because I was also thinking about in terms of social media, in terms of sharing our work, whether it's social media or websites or anything along those lines, especially with landscape photography. There's this perception of wilderness. There's this perception that the photographer had to work very hard to find that photo, when in reality there's so many opportunities that are all around us. And I'd say at this point, probably my favorite photo, if I did choose two, because it's hard to choose one, as you were saying there.
Yeah.
One of them was taken in Zion. It was snow falling on some trees and some clouds, and Zion's main canyon, and there's this cottonwood tree. It's covered in snow, and I shot it in January of 2021. I'm 10 feet from the road. I mean, I'm just like, I could jump almost to the road from where I was shooting it.
Yeah, I think you said that in your video for that one, if I'm remembering right. How close you were. It's a scene that
people drive past. It's perfectly accessible. But if you're to look at that photo, there's no
context.
There's nothing man-made. Yeah, there's no concept of where you are, where it was taken. So a person looking at that, they might assume that I hiked a long distance to get to it, but I'm on the side of the road. And there's another photo I really like that was taken in Zion, which is these yellow maple leaves on some wet sand with some little impact marks from raindrops falling from some leaves overhead.
Right, yeah.
And that one was taken probably a 1-minute walk from the road. You could see it from the road, which is how I knew it was there. So it's interesting with this perception of wilderness and this perception of what other people think when they see our work. But it had me thinking about all the opportunities that are around us. And that the photo you had from the porch is a perfect example of that, where we just have to be in the mindset to look and to be a good witness of everything else that's around us. And I'd be curious if you have any thoughts on that aspect when it comes to, observing our surroundings and finding subjects or anything along those lines.
I mean, that goes right in hand with like photographing around your backyard. I mean, William Neal is known for that really anymore. I mean, the photographs that he gets from the gardens that he's built up and the pond that he has with a mini waterfall and all of that he's talked about, the I'm sure that guy has more photographs now from his backyard than he has ever made from Yosemite that he's lived in for years now. I mean,
I've seen some of those photos, and I've always been a big fan of his work, and I know the exact photos you're talking about. It's a beautiful body of work, and to have something that close by is so nice.
But I mean, I don't think you even need to have something as extensive as what he's built up. He's built that up because of the fact that he wanted more intimate scenes and wanted to be more creative and more playful. But I mean, there are times where I'll walk around like the backyard to my house and I'll come up with 10, 15 different little compositions that I could easily photograph that could stand alongside of the ones that I go to Acadia or that I travel for, the little bit that I do. So I think people need to get over that perception, whereas you need to travel to these exotic locations to make great photographs. I mean, if you know what you're looking for, and like what you said, if you're in a creative mindset, then you can make great photographs within 10 feet of you.
Do you think you value the pictures more that you did have to work a bit harder to capture?
No. Because, no, I can't say that I do. Because I know photograph that I take is difficult to take. Anyone, if they saw through my eyes, could go along the same journey and take it, even with their phone. And my compositions really, if we're being honest, aren't anything special. And so I'm going to put more of a value on an intimate scene that means a lot to me versus something that's really difficult for me to capture. Because I can go through extensive amounts of difficulty to capture a scene only for it to not turn out well.
Interesting.
How do you feel on that?
I do think I put a little bit more emphasis, or maybe that's not the right word, but I have a little higher opinion perhaps of the photos I did work more for, but perhaps it's not because of the work. Perhaps it's because that work is what got me to an area that I could have all to myself. And maybe that is part of it. Because I'm thinking of the backpacking trips where, I'm definitely out of my element, kind of going to some of these beautiful areas, but then having a canyon all to myself. And it's not as though, the strenuous hike to get to that area makes me feel better about the work, but perhaps just that's a means by which arriving at that canyon and having the experience of having it all to myself. And perhaps that's what I'm thinking of and why we'll have a higher value of that image. And I do appreciate the pictures that are very accessible and along the road, because it's, I do, for me, it doesn't really matter where I find it, just so long as it's somewhere away from people, I guess. I guess that's the core of it. You work harder to get away from the people.
I think that's my big difficulty, though, when it comes to photographing alongside the road. I mean, there were two compositions that I've been looking at for, I'd almost say years now, that just lone trees out in the field. And I went and decided one day when conditions seemed all right, I pulled off to the side of the road and went and photographed each of them. But neither of them turned out well. And the entire time I was anxious. I just wasn't able to get into that element, being so close to the road. I mean, the one was a busier road than the other. But regardless of that, I think it was just one of those, I just wonder how that being so close to the road played into it, where I couldn't get away. I didn't have that sense of solitude that you get when you were actually further into the wilderness.
That's a very good point, especially since you're mentioning how you need to have that emotional connection to the subject that you're photographing. And if you are, closer proximity to a populated area, or in this case, a busy road, that's going to be tough to have that connection. Even if you're under the dark cloth and you're trying to silence everything out. You can't silence the vehicles, but try to visually silence the scene. But I can see how that would definitely have an impact. And that's the case for me as well. I mean, if I'm in Death Valley and if I see something that's pretty close to the road, it definitely has a bit of an impact. So I can see how, that would have a negative impact, but definitely try to find that middle ground of finding a subject you can have to yourself. You can have a clear mind. You can, think about the composition and everything else, but still having a very accessible location. I think that's sort of the sweet spot. And that's probably why I also like Zion, because there's so much stuff tucked away that you can find that sort of stuff and get away from the road pretty quickly, but still not be too far from it.
Yeah. I mean, even when I'm in the woods, if I even hear the road, like cars passing by it, I don't know, I don't feel as good as I would if I can't hear that kind of interaction.
So I kind of on that note, I have a question for you. And I'm curious if you're the same way. So if I'm in a place like Zion and they have a shuttle system that goes through the park, these buses, and you don't have private vehicles, and the shuttle buses run maybe every, let's just say 10 minutes. If I'm hiking off trail in an area that it's fine for me to be, but at the same time, if there is a bus going by, I'll duck behind a rock, duck behind a tree. I will stop moving because I know that movement, they'll see me if I'm moving.
Yeah.
But like, I can't control it. If I hear it coming by, I freeze or I just duck behind a rock. Do you do anything like that at all, or is it just me?
I think that's just you.
That's my special technique then.
Yeah. You're too afraid of being caught in the wilderness. You don't want to be seen as an influencer with your video cameras and your big camera. And
it probably doesn't help that I have a giant red backpack, though. At least in that case, I suspect people probably think I'm a rock climber because rock climbers will hike up some of these hillsides to the base of some of the cliffs where they'll start, doing some climbing there. But yeah, and I've talked to some other photographers who do the same thing. They'll see a car coming by, they'll see something by, and they'll just like freeze or duck behind a rock or something. So
I can't
it's
say
good
I've
to know
ever
that
done
I'm
that.
unique in that regard.
Especially given that you're in a national park. I mean, where are you going that would be like off limits? Like, at least for me, like I'm in like state parks or game lands or something, so I can very easily end up at someone else's property that's bordering
true.
that. Whereas with Zion, I mean, whose property are you going to be right against that you're trespassing in that you shouldn't be seen in? I mean, what are you doing out in those canyons there, Ben? Besides just photography,
Mostly playing with dolls. Mostly is what it amounts to. If people aren't aware of my parody account, that will make no sense whatsoever. But yeah, look it up, Instagram wilderness influencer, and then that might make a little bit more sense for those that are listening. But yeah, I think it comes down to there are very popular sections of the park where I would never dream of going off trail, just because it's an area that sees a lot of visitation, and if someone sees you, then they're gonna copy you and try to go there, and it's gonna
I get that,
cause all kinds of erosion and social trails and stuff like that. And then so some of the areas that I visit are less frequented parts of the park, where there's some climber trails and stuff like that aren't documented, like on any maps or anything like that. And I just fear that if people see me, that they're gonna be like, oh, look at him, I'm gonna go over there too and see what's going on over there. And so I think that's the main reason why I stop and do that. It's not that I'm not supposed to be there, but more so I just don't want others to follow me. Is what it comes down to. Yeah. But yeah, good to know that it's my unique superpower there, just stopping and casually trying to act like a tree by outstretching my arms and stuff like that.
with a giant red backpack.
With a giant red backpack, yeah. And speaking of which, I'm getting things ready for backpacking trip coming up.
Yeah, when are you leaving for that?
It's going to be early May, perhaps.
Okay.
Just depending on the weather. And I've got my pack to 34 pounds, which is pretty awesome for carrying an 8x10 with me. So I'm looking forward to that. And out of curiosity, have you ever weighed your your pack with your 4x5 kit to see where you're at in terms of what you're carrying around and all that?
I know I keep referencing it, but Acadia was the last time that I did. And it was around 20-ish, 25 pounds or so, which is quite a bit, especially given it's 4x5 and like hearing you say like 30 some 40-ish pounds with 8x10.
And that's with all the food and survival gear and everything else, which is pretty minimal, but still, it's crazy how much it adds up.
Yeah, now that I have this Gregory bag, I gotta reweigh everything and see. I plan on doing a true backpacking trip with one of my buddies come probably June, end of May, June area. So probably weigh it before then when it's all kitted out. But
is the buddy of yours, is he a photographer?
No, him and I, he's a mechanic at a shop that I used to work at for a little while. And so we just have a lot in common, and he loves being outside. So he's been talking about wanting to do a backpacking trip along the Appalachian Trail for a while now, but never had anyone to do it with, and he didn't want to go alone. So we decided that this is the year. So
very cool. Do you know if the Appalachian Trail has gotten extra busy lately?
I have no idea. That's something I hadn't thought about much of. At least for the little stretch that we would do within Pennsylvania, I don't think it would be too terribly busy as like the warmer states sections or even like northern, but find out.
I remember back in college, one of the classes I had, we read a book, I think it was Bill Bryson, and I believe it was about the Appalachian Trail. And it was a very interesting read, though when I was reading that book, I was picturing a very remote wilderness in terms of not seeing a lot of people, just run into some various people along the way. But I can only imagine now with Instagram culture and location tagging and everything else that there's probably a lot more interest in hiking. I've heard from some friends who have hiked some of the trails over here in California and Sierra Nevada, and they've just been absolutely busy since the pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see what your experience is with that. But that sounds like that'd be a pretty fun trip.
Yeah, I'm not sure what kind of activity there's going to be on the trails. I watched a YouTube video about someone who did the part of it down, I think, in Tennessee. And at least from their experience of it, it was a lot more like the popular areas you're going to see a lot more people at. But for the most part, they didn't really pass anyone or really see very many people, just at like except for sleeping huts, the lean-tos that they slept in. But yeah, up in Pennsylvania, I'm not quite sure.
Would you be bringing your photo kit on that?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, nice. How many film holders? I'm out of curiosity, because I would imagine your friends probably going to want to cover a fair amount of ground, perhaps, or do you think they would be pretty good with the process of slowing down and shooting and all that?
He knows how I am with we've gone out on hikes before, so he knows how I work with my 4x5 and how it's a lot more methodical than what anything else would be. So we have to talk about when we're going and how long we're going to be going for, but I know that even just for the sake of taking it, even if I only take it out once or twice over, let's say, a 4-day span, I mainly want to try it because of going to the Smokies and see how heavy my pack is fully loaded for a trip like that. So that way I just have the knowledge in the back of my head and see how comfortable it is on the trail if I do something on my own or somewhere else.
Yeah, in the packing for my trip, I've been trying to reduce the weight. So like all the little odds and ends I have to take with me, the lenses, cable releases, all the little bits and pieces. I find that if I just wrap them all up in my dark cloth and then stow that in my backpack, it's nice, because then it saves a little bit of room in terms of, or it saves a little bit of weight, because I'm using that dark cloth as a way of keeping everything together, keeping everything padded and protected. So I did that, and it allowed me to save a little bit of bulk, which is good. And then also back during the pandemic, when my wife and I were ordering food with Amazon Fresh, early on they were shipping the refrigerated stuff in these like silvery, bubble wrappy kind of large bags. They're very, very lightweight. And I find that if I just take the whole dark cloth with everything, all the contents rolled up in it, and drop it inside that bag, it makes it so nothing can fall out of there. It also gives me a place to put stuff when I am using the dark cloth. So there's all kinds of interesting solutions like that can help save a little bit of weight. And I've gone down the route of buying a lot of the ultralight stuff, which is expensive, but it is pretty crazy how light you can get things, which will certainly come in handy when hiking out there.
Now, are you still using your Gregory bag, your, what is that, 105 liter Denali that you have for your backpacking trips, or are you just something else?
For the backpacking trips, I'll still have that with me, like in my truck, because I'll use that for the photography days when I'm, not backpacking, when I'm working for my truck. So I'll have it with me, but I do have a extremely lightweight pack. It's I think a 74 liter pack made by Z Packs. It's called the Arc Haul Zip. Arc Haul. Yeah, I'm saying it right. Just my brain's not working right now because it's 95 degrees outside and I have no insulation in my home office here. But it's called the Arc Haul Zip, and it's a very, very lightweight pack. And my only concern is I'm right at about 34. My alarm's going off here. I'm right at about 34 something pounds before water, and I think it's rated for 35 pounds. Ooh. And I'm concerned that if I put too much weight in it, I don't want to break something in the bag.
Right.
But that being said, it saves me a lot of weight, because that Gregory pack it's like 10 pounds.
Yeah.
Just for the pack itself.
Yeah, when I was looking at packs, I ended up with a Baltora 65 liter, mainly because it was on the outlet. Got it for a really good price, but I mean, even that's what, I think it's like 3 pounds, maybe 4 pounds.
Yeah.
Something like that, the bag alone. And then you look at something like the newer version of the Denali that they have that's 100 some liter, and it's like you said, like right around 8-10 pounds, just the pack alone.
Yeah. Yeah, those big packs are made for like super cold climates, when you have like these big, huge sleeping bags and super bulky stuff. But at least the one I have, man, they're built to last a long time. So it'll last me a long time, but I'm definitely looking forward to having a little lighter weight kit. So it'll give me a little more bounce in my step when checking out some canyons and stuff along those lines.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Are you bringing the new Chamonix for that, or are you bringing the Intrepid? Or
yeah,
okay,
yeah, I'm bringing the Chamonix. I'm bringing 4 film holders, 3 lenses. So it's a fairly decent kit in terms of pretty basic, but has everything I really need. But man, when you get down in some of those canyons, and it's just calm and peaceful, the sound of the wind through the cottonwood leaves, and then all the various birds echoing through the canyons and stuff. It's so nice down in there. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com, and you can find my work at benhorn.com. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us by email at cody@codyschultz.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.